The Game Schooler podcast is a weekly audio show that educates new and experienced gamers about the awesomeness of tabletop gaming. In this week's episode, we'll cover First in Flight, our game of the week, discuss physical tools for teaching games in the School of Gaming, and wrap it up by revealing our High Five Dice Chucking Games version 2.0. Welcome to the Game Schooler podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kotecki, along with my co-host, Dr. Michael McCabe. How's it going, Michael?
Great, Doug. How are you?
I am fantastic. We got a lot of cool things to talk about in this show. Why don't you take the lead? What's new? What do you got to follow up on?
Boy, I don't even know where to start. We've played a lot of games in our house. You and I have gotten a lot of games to the table over the last week or so. It's always exciting to play games for the first time that are well known, but that I haven't yet played. And then we've gotten just some great interaction from our listeners on the Discord as well. So things are going strong. There's so many good things to celebrate in the hobby writ large, and it's fun to be a part of.
Yeah, well, a reminder to check out the videos of the podcast if you haven't been doing that. Those are releasing on YouTube and Spotify if you do the video through there. One of the interesting things to follow up on, and I didn't tip you off to this, and I actually didn't go back to listen to what your list was, but somebody was listening to an episode in the past in which we were talking about games that we still wanted to play.
Yep.
And wanted to follow up on whether we had actually played them and what our thoughts were. And so this was a list from episode 55 from, I think we talked about Happy City, and it was games from 2021 that we still want to play. So I wanted to go through my list and tell you what I thought. And in fact, I have played everyone on the list except for one and even the honorable mentions. So
well, congratulations, Doug.
Thank you. Honorable mentions, Trails. We talked about that as a game of the week in the past. I didn't bother to look it up, but it's a good game because it made our game of the week.
Yep.
Another honorable mention was Horrified American Monsters, which Michael and I had a chance to play. And for me, it didn't hold up as well as the original one. I thought the original one is a little bit cleaner and streamlined, and the American Monsters one has some extra stuff going on. Is that all right if I just rapid fire through this? All right. The last honorable mentions was Destinies, which I enjoyed the experience. It's kind of a storytelling chronicles of crime where you're scanning cards and there's a narrative going on. The interesting thing is that I believe it's entirely for 3 players or only for 3 players. And each player has their own kind of story and objective, and you don't know what the other players are trying to do.
And it's competitive.
And it's competitive. And I enjoyed it I enjoyed the process of it, but not having my narrative fulfill at the end was unrewarding for me.
It was sad for Doug, right?
It was sad. I had boo-boo face for a couple days. I did play it later solo with my daughter as a cooperative thing where we just took one character, and that was interesting. But in most games, when I lose a game, it's not a big deal. But because I was so heavily invested in my character, I really felt hurt when I lost. So that one, I enjoyed my experience, but it's not one that has stayed around in my collection. Now, getting onto the list proper, Michael and I played Meadow a while ago. That was kind of the hot buzz at the time. And we got it played, and it has some elements to me that are similar to Forest Shuffle, where there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of scorekeeping going on. But more importantly, it was a very solitaire experience. There is some kind of blocking with the way that you acquire cards, but it just didn't really seem that interesting to me. The next one is The Hunger, which is a deck-building vampire game from Richard Garfield put out by Renegade. I enjoyed that one, but it was kind of samey and didn't do enough interesting stuff. The only kind of interesting thing for me in that one was the idea that if you did not get home before daybreak, you automatically lost. There was like an area that you had to go out, and you were kind of balancing between the civilians that you were biting into and adding to your group of vampires, and some of them gave you good bonuses and some of them not so great bonuses, but trying to do some set collection along the way. I enjoyed it. It was one of those. There's a hard part in this hobby, and that Michael and I have really come to, I think, appreciate and be more aware of, is playing a game that I may enjoy or I like a little bit, but being aware that I'm not going to get that to the table again. Yeah. Or I don't have a group to play it consistently, and it didn't have strong enough of an impression for me to say, yeah, this is going to sit on my shelf, and I don't care if I don't play it for another 10 years, foreshadowing. You know, that's okay, that there's just sometimes games that we like and we enjoy, but I don't know who I'm going to play this with.
Yeah, and if you have the space and if you have the resources, I mean, you're the only person that you need to justify your game to. This is a hobby, right? And that's something that I am becoming more and more comfortable with. And I think the other thing, too, that I've been reflecting on lately, just as you're talking about some of those games, and I'm thinking back to playing a lot of them as well, is there's something to learning the game and knowing how the game works and just enjoying that first experience of it. I think for me, that matters a lot. And when we are sharing our impressions, or dare I say our reviews of a game, I'm trying to be conscious of that as well.
Yeah.
So,
the next one on my list is King Domino Origins, which is still on my shelf. It still needs to be played. Still actually want to play that one. Number 2 was So Clover, which I have played. And I also, you know, in going through this list, it's also one of those things where I play a game and sometimes there's just stuff that does it better, or I give a very similar experience. And for me, this one kind of reminded me, it's a game in which you're writing words down, and it's a cooperative game, but you write words on this clover, and then your fellow players are trying to reorganize cards onto the clover in the order that they think that you wrote them down, basically the clues for. And it reminds me a little bit of that kind of thinky party game type of style as Codenames. It's in that vein. And it ultimately comes down to, and it's by the same, you know, sometimes those comparisons don't come naturally. This is by the same group that did Just One. And Just One, because it's by the same group, you're going to compare them. And I always prefer Just One over So Clover. And the last one on my list is Arc Nova, which is one that I should play again. My first playthrough was kind of overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff in that game. It's a longer game, and I'd like to give it another try. I don't know if it was still fit in my wheelhouse, but my friend Michael has it, so I know I don't need to go out.
Anytime
and buy it.
You want to play it, Doug, just give a holler, and I'll be there, or I'll invite you over. Yeah, and Arc Nova is one of those where you really have to have about 3 hours to do it right. And I'm sure there could be people listening that are saying, I can get it done in 90 minutes.
Congratulations.
You've just told us that you've played it at least 37 times. But even just playing it a second and a third time, some things really happen that didn't happen for me in that first time.
Yeah.
That'll be a good one that maybe we'll play again someday.
So I'll give you an assignment. Go back and listen to that episode. I want to see what your 5 were.
You want me to do that right now in real time, or do I have until the next episode?
You have until the next episode. I think that might take too long, unless you've got them in your notes.
I could do that research, but let's keep it moving. I'll bring that back next week.
Got to play some Happy City on Board Game Arena. with some
bragging
folks
about
from the
his win.
Discord.
Look at that over there. I could tell
Didn't
you if
say
it would have
anything
gone one
about that.
card differently, he wouldn't be. So, Chipper, tell us about that game of Happy City.
It was fun. It was the first
Yeah,
time
it
I
is.
played anything on Board Game Arena. It was a great game to try that on. And what did it take, about a day and a half?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it moved pretty quickly, and I enjoyed that. That was pretty cool. How about you?
Yeah, no, I have a lot of things like that to follow up on. I've been using Board Game Arena more and more to refresh on games, to kind of relearn some rules, or just to. I have a handful of games that I still want to play, but don't have people to play them with yet. So that works out great on there, and it's been nice to play a game or two with some of our listeners as well. So that's been a nice platform. To me, though, nothing substitutes for playing games in person at the table in real time. And we've just been fortunate enough. I don't want to jump in and give away all the hits that we've been playing and the hotness and make people jealous. One game that you and I have really enjoyed playing, may I talk about this hit from 1992?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Do you know who the President of the United States of America was in 1992?
Well, that's an election year, so it depends.
Boom.
But theoretically, because the new president would not be sworn in until 1993, that would have been George H.W. Bush at the time.
Look at the big brain on Doug. I tried to trick him in multiple ways, but I think everything you said is correct. Yeah, we played Speculation by good old Rudiger Dorn. I think we can call him
Dirk
Rudy.
Kent,
We've reviewed
actually.
enough of his games. What's that? Oh, Dirk Kent. Who?
Yeah.
Man, that's. I gotta blame our friend who said that it was Rudiger Dorn last night.
Yeah,
Dirk
no, it's
Hen.
Dirk Hen.
I don't
Same
know.
designer
I don't
of
know
Alhambra.
Dirk Hen as well as Rudy Dorn, so I'll just Dirk Hen, same designer
Yeah.
as Alhambra, and Carrot, and a few others that I know because of it's a stock game from 1992 that we had a ton of fun playing. I'll send it over to you, Doug, while I get my facts straight.
Yeah, so Speculation is an interesting game where you are acquiring stocks, and the stock prices of those, there are 8 stocks in the game, and they are fluctuating frequently and rapidly. And so trying to time it right where you're buying it low and selling it high, of course, is the name of the game. And there are stock movement. In order to move the stocks, the players are playing cards out of their hand, and there's a movement token that's drawn from a bag, and the amount of movement can be anywhere from 1 to 6 spaces. So if a stock is moving 6 spaces up the track, that's a huge gain. But each player has this card called a bank holiday card, which can basically just nullifies that whole movement phase of the turn. And so you may be holding on to a stock and you've got it in your hand and you want to play that card down because the movement is 6. And Michael's a big old jerk, so he plays the bank holiday, and that stock doesn't move at all. And you're trying to, it's got the good amount of bluffing and chaos and a little bit of control or perceived control that really hits on a lot of buttons that I enjoy in a game that doesn't take itself too seriously.
Yeah, no, and plays in an hour. Really, really easy to learn and teach. We played 2 different games at 3 players with 2 different play groups, and I think there's a lot there. I do think it would even fit in a lot of middle school, high school settings. Certainly, to see a game from 1992 that still played well, that was fun.
Yeah, and the only note I have because we've been playing some really cool games recently, but one of the notes that we talked about in the past episode was the idea of wanting to play more games from our collections, older games that we haven't gotten to the table. Last time I played that game was 10 years ago, and it's been on my shelf ever since. And I reaffirmed that I want it on my shelf.
That's awesome.
For that time period. So I know Michael likes to have that idea of like, if I can get this played every 1 or 2 years. And it's like, there's a game that was on my shelf for 10 years. And we played it again, and I don't regret keeping it on my shelf for 10 years. But the interesting thing on top of that is some of the classic games that we're playing, it becomes more apparent the effects that Kickstarter has had on the hobby, where some of these games are cleaner, they're more well developed. You can get them up and you're playing them, and it just works. There's no extra stuff. You know that part is in the game because the designer wanted it in the game, not because they were trying to do a stretch goal and they added something. And so
Doug's hitting a lot of feelings today, listeners. So many inside jokes are being activated. I don't know. I might need a break from Doug. And I know I've invited his family over for a cookout this weekend, but Doug might have to stay away.
Why is that?
Because you're hitting so many different feelings here with I didn't know we were
emotional.
going there.
I'm pulling it all out. Yeah.
But
bearing my soul.
We've talked about, we're not the only ones to talk about the pre-Kickstarter games. They needed to be a complete game. You had to make something that was going to sit on people's shelf, that was going to be a full experience. So I think I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure I'll come back to it in later segments.
I think the moral of the story for me, or the thing that I want to impart to the listeners, is the idea of just because that date says pre-2015, give it a try. Even though it may not look fancy and have all the bells and whistles, sometimes the design makes up for the lack of bells and whistles. And sometimes now the bells and whistles are covering up a poor design. And I just encourage people to try some of those old classics because they're old classics for a reason.
Well, and I think you get different feelings and experiences with some of those games. There are games from a different era where it was okay to be mean. And being mean just meant that the other player had to continue. Yeah, you lost your money that you might have earned, and it might not set up an awesome combo that you were about to trigger, but tough. What do you need to do next? And that's what I've enjoyed about playing, some of the games that are 30, 20, and even 10 years old. They have a little bit different edge to them from time to time.
Yeah, well, and the other thing too is that I feel like there's a lot more, or interaction and table experience was a bigger deal back then when those games were designed. And you and I have gone through a whole handful of games that we get done playing and we're like, I felt like I just played a game by myself. You were at the table with me, but we were kind of just working on our own thing, and there was no push and pull with the interaction. And I think some of those, there was no need to have that kind of solitaire experience back then. So they didn't. The whole point was getting folks to the table and having a shared experience, and I think that's reflected in the design as well. Good. Anything else you want to talk about, Michael?
Not about follow-up. I've got one thing that's awesome. I
Share.
As a parent, I know other parents, around the world will empathize with this. Do you ever get tired of being called into a different room? Or are there times where you are tired of hearing your name? Like, Dad! Dad! And you just want to scream back, what? Now, I had restraint. I didn't scream back, what? I walked down the stairs. I saw my 8-year-old, and there were games that were stacked off of a little chair, like a little desk chair, a little chair that a kindergartner would have at a kidney table, taller than me. So I'm still trying to figure out. In fact, now I know I just solved why this room was set up the way that was, because the stool that my laptop is sitting on, my child must have used it to get games down. I'm glad she didn't take this Castles of Burgundy Collector's Edition.
But I walked
downstairs, and there were just games from chair 6 feet off the ground. It was and all different types of games: Super Mega Lucky Box, Food Fight, Micro Macro, 5-Minute Mystery, Magical Labyrinth, games that all games that she knows and plays and enjoys. In that moment, not only did I have a tear in my eye as a proud gamer dad, but the other thing was just, I don't know where that came from. Nobody said, hey, we're going to get together and play games. No, this was a random Monday after school time, and she wanted to connect with her family, and she let us know what games were going to be played this week. So that was pretty cool. I went from a moment of irritability because of, doing the dishes and wrapping up prep from after doing dinner, and I had a day of work and my mind's in 3 different places. And I thought there was going to be some sort of mess downstairs I had to clean up. And little did I know there was a big old stack of games. So it was fun.
That's cool. Awesome. Anything else you want to share for this?
I think this monster opening segment is good to go, buttoned up,
right.
and I'll bring some things into next week.
All right. Just a couple of quick reminders, some housekeeping. You can sign up for the Discord by going to gameschooler.com/Discord, a great community of like-minded game schoolers. So check that out. Spread the word about the podcast if you like what we're doing. And contact us if you got any questions or comments. Email at gameschooler.com. We'd love to hear from you. With that out of the way, let's move on to the game of the week.
The game of the week. The game of the week is an in-depth look at a family-friendly game we think you should try if you get the chance. This week's game is First in Flight. Doug, give us the stats.
All right. Published in 2023 by Artana. The designers are Matthew O'Malley and Ben Rossett. The art is by Tomas Bogusz and Amelia Sales. 1 to 4 players, 45 to 75 minutes. 12 plus according to the box, 10 plus according to Board Game Geek. I'm going to throw that closer to the 12 plus. And I think that this potentially straddles the line between a family and a light hobby game, depending on what your kind of gaming experience may be. What do you think about that, Michael?
I think it lands firmly in light hobby.
Okay.
But that's right. You go and we'll talk and we'll see where we settle by the end of the segment. I'm excited to talk about this one.
Yeah, I think you're accurate. I think it leans more towards the light hobby, for sure. Even though Board Game Geek's rating system would be horribly wrong.
Let's talk about the Game Schooler podcast rating system, and let's tell folks about the game, and they'll be able. Our listeners are discerning, thoughtful, professional listeners by this point. They'll be able to decide.
There you go. First in Flight is a push-your-luck deck-building game about the race to early flight. Players take on the roles of the Wright brothers, Samuel Langley, and other flight pioneers, racing to build the pilot the flyers that preceded modern airplanes. Each player's flyer design is represented by a deck of cards that can steadily improve and refine, and which may include unknown design flaws that threaten their success. Flying is a blackjack-style challenge to test a design, breaking new records and gaining experience, hopefully without crashing. Then players head back to the workshop, refine their flyers, and improve their chances of future flights. There are dozens of available technologies, pilot skills, friends in the field available for players to customize their own play style and strategy. In this game, the gameplay takes place over 4 years, 4 rounds, in which you are moving around a circular board, taking actions. The player that is furthest behind will take the next action and can move as far forward as they would like. Some of the things that you can do on your turn is you can upgrade your flyer, which is upgrading your deck. In order to do that, you're going to pay some money or time and acquire new cards. The cards you start out in the beginning of the game have a flight time or a glide time of 1. So these upgrade cards are going to be numbered from 2 to 5. And you pay time or money. You'll take a couple of those cards, but then you're also going to get an unknown design flaw. Design flaws are the things that contribute to crashing while you're flying, and we'll get to those in a second. The other thing that you can do is you can get help from friends. Those are special ability cards that you can use once per year. You can get
not to be confused with friends at the table that you may be playing the game with. They are not your friends during the game. These are other friends that are on a card. So it's an abstract of a possible friend. I would just didn't want our listeners to be confused. This is a competitive game. Back to you, Doug.
There are also technology cards, which are kind of active abilities throughout the entire game. And there are some skill cards that you can use while you're flying. So you can acquire those throughout the game. You're going to be getting some money, which is going to help you upgrade your plane and get some of the cards we talked about. The other main action that you can do is fly. So when you take a flight, you are going to shuffle all the cards in your flight deck, shuffle them all up, and start revealing them one at a time. Every time a design flaw or a flaw comes out, it's got a kind of a little crash symbol. If you ever get 4 of those, you bust and you will crash, okay, which is not good. But anytime during your flight, you can say, I'm going to descend, and you take your descend card. If you safely descend, you're going to get 5 extra flying points, and if you crash, that is reduced down to 2. But after you descend, you shuffle the remaining cards in your deck, and you draw 2 more. Assuming you don't crash, you total all the cards in your flight, and that is your score, your flight distance. And in this game, you are not scoring new points every time you do a flight. You are just keeping track of your longest flight. So if the first time I go for a flight, I get 15 points, or a score of 15, and the next time I get 13, my marker is still going to stay at the 15. It isn't until I surpass that. A bonus of getting to a flight path of 15th or a flight length is each player starts with a character card, and that character upgrades once you have a flight of 15. So you get a little bit more of a more powerful ability as the game goes on. The game ends when somebody reaches a flight of 40 or more, and then each other player is going to get another chance to fly and get a higher score than them. One of the interesting things, though, is there is one action space I haven't talked about, and that is called the repair space. So after you go on a flight and you uncover some of these design flaws, the design flaws that you start the game with have extra text and nastiness on them, right? So it might be a situation where if this is the first design flaw you flipped over, it counts as 2 crash symbols instead of 1. Or if you, what are some of the, if the next one that you draw is a regular 1-point glide card, you have to discard it. So things like that, but you don't know which ones are in your deck when you start the game. So after you do your first flight and you see some of those, you can put those cards in your garage. You can then repair those with an action, and when you repair them, each card gives you a bonus when you repair it, so you're going to get something good out of it. But you're going to replace that one that has some unpredictable elements with a basic flaw card, which the only thing on a basic flaw card is just one of those crash symbols. So you're getting rid of the randomness and the uncontrollability of some of those other ones.
Sorry for the delay there, Doug. Surprisingly, Board Game Geek does not have a single one of those nasty design flaw cards. They have beautiful pictures of all different parts of the game, the nice little metal coins, they've got a whole picture where all the technology cards are spread, but the mean ones, the really memorable ones, they're not on there. So maybe we'll have to upload them.
There you go. So that is how you play. That's the game of First Flight. What am I missing, Michael? What do you like?
No, I don't think you missed anything. I think you did a really good job with the overview and explaining, there's that sense of unknown in the early play of what exactly is going on here. And then taking a flight, it becomes very apparent of, I have to get some upgrades in here. But what happens when you get upgrade cards that will allow you to extend the flight and allow the flight to go further, because those cards are going to be 2, 3, 4, and 5. Well, a really nasty card is also going to come into your deck. And you need to know where that's at and get that repaired and get that out of your deck. So there's that nice little back and forth that's happening in this game. The other piece that we've been talking all about the gameplay. I think if you look at the publisher Artana and some of the other games that they've done and just how this game is rooted in science and history, there's a lot there too from the game schooling aspect. And we don't need to do a hard turn and go there just yet. But that is certainly present in this beautifully produced game.
Well, and the thing that I really enjoy about this game is that the artwork, the theme, and the presentation, the mechanisms of that is the immersion with those themes and mechanisms with the history is really well done. I really feel like what I'm doing is going on a flight and bad things may happen. And in order to, then I have to go back to my shop and tinker and make my deck a little bit better, my plane a little bit better. So I go around the next time and hopefully I have a better flight. And the way the simple actions that you're doing to make that happen, I think is a really good marriage of theme mechanism and mechanisms working together really well, which you don't see in a lot of games that, like, yeah, okay, that's the theme. But this one really works those two components together.
Yeah. Oh, it was built around it. You can tell.
Yeah. The other thing that I really enjoy about this one is there are a couple of small design things that they've done that are not, they don't necessarily improve gameplay or anything like that, but they save time and are unbelievably smart that I want to highlight. First of all, the insert in the game gets you up and running in no time. It's perfectly laid out to take it out of the box, set it to the side, and start rolling, which I think is awesome. And I did a check into, I happen to have the deluxe edition, but I wanted to make sure what the differences were between the two. And from what I can gather, the insert is the same. The other thing that is genius is the descend card. When you decide to play that into your flight, that card is thicker than the other cards dimensionally.
Just slightly larger.
So that the next time you go to fly, you pick up your cards at the end of the flight, you don't accidentally shuffle that in. It's sticking out like a sore thumb, and you can set it aside again, which is so smart that I can only assume came from playtesting of, oh, well, we'll just make it the same size. And then everybody started shuffling it in, like, we need to come up with something. And so I really want to highlight those as cool things that the publisher has done and the designer or developer, whoever made those decisions, that really help get the game up and running fast and moving smoothly. That being said, some things to be aware of in this game is that calculating the points of a flight can be cumbersome. Once you start getting, the early flights, not such a big deal, but once you start getting into the later flights where there's, you have new abilities and modifiers and you're dealing with higher numbers, it is not something that I think that's where that 12 plus is really important, because that takes some brain power to kind of think and calculate.
Well, and there are bonuses that also trigger off sometimes and other times don't. And that's the reason why I have this in light hobby. It comes down to the in-game scoring to try to figure out, well, did my flight make it to 40 or not? Am I triggering the end game here or not? Very, very well-designed game, but a game that I know that if I brought into my house or if I was taking this into a community setting, I would need to run that game. I'm not just going to get to sit down and be fully immersed as the player. And that's one of those distinguishers that I make between a family game and a light hobby game. Oftentimes in a family game, I could just sit back and be a player. But if it's a light hobby game, I need to be more of a facilitator and make sure that everybody at the table knows what's going on. And then the iconography is the other piece too, where I think they did a really good job from a design standpoint. But some of the icons, there's just a lot of them. There's a lot of icons and a lot of text, so I think you need to be able to read independently. But I will say, I mean, we just played this with your kiddo yesterday, and she really picked up that iconography quickly. So that 12-year-old range really seems to be about the right range. Yeah,
I really enjoy the push your luck element of this game when you're going on a flight, and has similar feel to a game like Mystic Vale. But the one thing that it does have, and it really reminds me a lot of, and it's something that I probably talked about it when we talked about Quacks of Quedlinburg, but this is a very similar game, has some of those same feelings. And my complaint with Quacks of Quedlinburg is my same complaint with this game, which is sometimes things might not work out.
Oh, yeah.
I've had good experiences with this game, and I've had that it just didn't work out. Like, I just didn't get lucky. The cards didn't come out in the right order. I crashed in a bad time. And that can be disappointing after a 45-minute game or an hour where it's just like, it all came down to that last turn and it didn't quite work out, or I just couldn't get over that hump. And so that luckiness is in there, which sometimes I hit a roadblock with Quacks of Quedlinburg as well. The irony is in both of those scenarios, both of those games, I love playing the game. It's almost after the game that I'm like, I just wish I had something would have changed. But while I'm doing it, it's fine. I never even notice it until it's like the last turn. It's like, it just didn't work for me. I didn't have enough time, or, I just drew bad, whatever it may be. When you're talking about a deck builder or bag builder, those and the concept of busting, those things are going to happen.
Yeah, where do you think this sits on easy to learn, easy to play? Because when I look at Board Game Geek, and I know we don't talk about the complexity scale a ton as much anymore, but it is rated as a 2.17. And I'm thinking this would be more of like a 2.5, or am I just completely misreading that? And no, this is a simple game. You just get it up and get moving, or is there more going on than what I'm giving it credit? Or is it easier?
I think they're two separate issues. Yeah, 2.17. I think for me, the teaching and learning of the core mechanisms of the game are fairly straightforward.
Yes.
There's only 4 or 5 different action spaces on the whole board, and the way that the turn structure works, very easy. It's very easy to teach this game and get up and playing. The complexity comes in with the building in your plane and the other cards and the things around it. So, in playing with my daughter, it was one of those things where she knew how to do everything. There wasn't a confusion of like, where do I go, or what do I do next, or what does this space do? She knew all of that stuff, but why she should do one thing or the other, and the impacts that can cause is where it gets more complicated, in my opinion. So the teach and the mechanisms are easy. The strategy and the interlocking nature of everything is where it adds that complexity. So they're kind of working against each other. So ease of learn, I would put to a 2.0.
Yeah.
The strategy and complexity, I'd probably put up at a 2.5 or a 2.75.
Yeah, and if those were on two different axes, yeah, I would land more towards that 2.5. But either way, light hobby, I digress. I think this is a game that I've had a tough time figuring out how to play it. And, if I played it 3 times all the way through, and there are some games that just work for some people better than others. And I could tell the first time we played it, your eyes lit up, you were engaged, you figured it out, you knew exactly how to go. You're saying, it reminds me of Tokaido meets Quacks, and I like this, and I like that. And in all 3 plays, I've just had a hard time figuring out when to go for the flight, how to make things work together. And I think that, that's okay to admit and to say on the air. And at the same time, it is a fantastically designed game.
Yeah.
There's real people in there. There's also real learning that you could do if you wanted to go in that direction.
Yeah.
We reviewed another game from Artana all the way back in episode 37, Power Failure. Admittedly, I think we're 2 of the biggest fans of that game. We've continued to talk about it here over the last few years. I was glad to see another hit from Artana. Have you played any of the other designers' games, Search for Planet X or any of the other games, or is this your first game from this designed duo?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, I haven't played Between Two Cities or Search for Planet X yet. So this is
Between
my
Two
first.
Cities I've played.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Like last night, the 2 times we played it, I felt like I knew what was going on. Last night, I felt like you knew what was going on, and I was the one playing catch up. And I think that's where it pulls me back to that Quack thing. It's like sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it doesn't.
But that's push your luck, right? Because you're pushing your luck.
It's the same thing with Heat. Sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it doesn't. And I think it's just part of the game. And
that's where I want to give just kind of one little thing here. And listeners, if you're able, if you have game groups, right? And if you have a game group that, these are the adults that I play games with. This is my lunchtime group. This is my work group. And if you play games with a family or nieces or nephews or in a school setting, I encourage you to play First in Flight with kids. There's something whimsical that was brought to the table yesterday because we were playing with an 11 or 12-year-old kiddo. They were just out there just flipping the cards and trying to get their flight further. She wasn't worried about, oh, if I do this, then that. There was something really refreshing to just see the curiosity and dare I say the childish impulsiveness that sometimes makes me laugh and chuckle with the cards just getting flipped up. Bam, 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 coming out on the table. It was like, that's the right way to play this game. It really brought me back to the table in a way too, because previously I'd only played this game with adults and with adults who play a lot of games. And I don't want to say that it was a warped or jaded, but there was just something really refreshing yesterday about playing this game with a kiddo who was having a blast playing it. You know, and just going on the flight and making repairs and, oh, I don't have any money. And it brought a levity to the table too, that it's like, this is why we do the podcast. This is why we're the Game Schooler podcast. This is a fun little game. So I just wanted to say that to our listeners, that there really is something nice about that part of the hobby.
Yeah, and it highlights probably a flaw in my own thinking, where that impulsive nature and the thing of, you know, my daughter was going to crash and burn. Maybe not. She didn't care if she crashed. It was like, oh, well, type of thing. And how can I do this? Look at this special. I'm really being excited about the abilities. And I think my flaw as a gamer is probably taking those games, I don't want to say too seriously, but getting caught up in trying to control the uncontrollable and being okay with that. Like there's nothing I can do about it. And if I'm enjoying the game in the throughout the process, that's fine. And it was refreshing to see that where it didn't matter. And oh well, like I crashed. I didn't get the flight I wanted.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, I crashed twice. The other thing that's cool about this game is I think it is a really great mixture of interaction and personal gameplay. So there is interaction on the board of once a spot is taken, you can't go there unless you've got some card that gives you an ability or something like that. So it has that tension of, where's Michael going to go? I hope he doesn't take that spot. If I go too far ahead, am I just giving people a whole bunch of turns that I don't want to do that? Like, so there is that table interaction of what people are doing that is there and keeps me engaged. And there is that, all right, somebody's going on a flight. Everybody looks up and watches what's going on, and you feel like you're invested in enjoying it. At the same time, you're in your own little world as well. So it's a good mixture of that, where there's nothing that Michael can do outside of taking the spot I want to go to that is going to mess up my flight. There's no take that. There's no, oh, here's a design flaw for every other character. There's none of that. And so I think it does a good job of balancing that line of, I can work in my own little silo, but I'm still part of the group, and there is a group interactive experience going on.
So let's talk about a few skills then, Doug. What are some of the skills that are present in First in Flight?
I mean, I think the big ones are risk management and personal responsibility. So the idea of the actions that you're taking and the consequences, and that idea of, okay, so I'm upgrading my plane, but I'm adding a whole bunch of design flaws, which could be terrible. And then how much effort do I want to put into having some control over those terrible things with the risk management, and how many how many cards do I think I have left that I can still go to, and actually drawing that next one, but then flipping that on the scale and saying, yep, guess I shouldn't have drawn that many. And having that immediate, that failed. And there's that try and try again mentality that the early pioneers of aviation were dealing with that comes out in this game.
Yeah, and I think observation is also a skill, especially through repeated plays. We define observation as a game that rewards careful watching of details and behaviors in order to understand or arrive at a judgment. And admittedly, what I'm about to share comes after about 5 hours of experience, so just take that into context. But Doug and I, we played 3 full games of this over the last month or so. Yeah. And in between each game, each session, a lot of discussion, a lot of back and forth, really analyzing and dissecting the game. And Doug is not one who likes to have unknown variables. So he is going to repair his plane as often as possible. So I, as another player, and you're not going to get this on the first game or even the second game unless you really know that person you're playing games with. But in repeated plays, it's, well, if I want to get to that repair spot, I need to make sure that I'm getting there one time before Doug, or have a coin so that I can slide into that any spot while Doug is then taking a flight. And it's just, so it's almost that combination of observation and comprehension and just understanding what the other players at the table are prone to want to do, and also where they're at in the game. If somebody is getting ready for that last big final flight, they're probably not going to slide in and get a technology card or add a person to their deck. They're getting ready to do their last big final flight. So I might be able to do 2 turns, essentially, make 2 stops, and you get that sense of I did something extra because I watched the board. And I had that feeling as an adult, but also just watching, kids and other people play the game and get that little sense of awesomeness.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing that this game, usually when I play games, I will find a strategy or a thing that I enjoy doing in the game, and I usually will default to that most times, and that's just what I'm going to do. This is a game that, for whatever reason, I'm intrigued by all of the different avenues of what you can do, and focusing on different areas, and that they can all work out. And I've had games where I went heavy on repair, and it worked out well. I went heavy on repair, and it didn't work out well. I went heavy on having the permanent abilities, and that worked awesome. But then I'm trying to do my flight, and I see Michael's got 10 green cards that he can manipulate and change all the things that he's doing during his flight to give him way better odds. And you're like, yeah, that's pretty cool too. So there's a lot of different avenues to go after, and there's none that are unappealing to me, which is rare. Sometimes there's strategies in a game that I'm like, I don't care how many times I play this game, I'm never going to go after that for whatever reason. Like, just not my play style. And this one I can see going, and the value of all of the different avenues, which I think is pretty cool.
That is cool. Other skills?
All right. What's that?
Other skills to touch on?
No, I think those are the big, huge ones. You got any more?
Well, I had a question for you, because I know you said you have the deluxe edition, but is there a specific tie-in to science? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I know that Artana and Genius Games typically will have some sort of curriculum guide. We've got librarians, we've got game schoolers, we've got homeschoolers, we've got teachers who listen to the podcast, and I think we're kind of burying the lead with that in some way. But before we move on from it, what's your take on that?
So this is going to fall more towards the historical side than the science or math side. In the back of the rule book, there is biographies, mini biographies of all of the pilots that you can be in the game, and all of those helper friends that show up throughout the game as well that you can add. So if you're looking for the historical side, and I think that's more where Artana is at as opposed to the science. I think a lot of their games are geared towards historical events and things. I mean, they're always science adjacent, but the
Tesla
big things, are always towards those kind of biographies and great enhancements. I do have that. I think this would be a great example for, we were talking a couple weeks ago of the idea of games in classrooms and hobby games. This to me is a great example of simulating that flight and that experience just in the front of the room classroom of like, all right, here's a pre-assembled flight, and just showing that process happen, that push your luck, and comparing that to the idea of the first aviators going through that. So I think there are some elements in this gameplay that you can use without playing an entire game to kind of illustrate those points of what it was like of that repeated, the improvements, the continual improvement of a plane and where it starts and what those folks were going through at the time. So I think this is a great way to do that as well.
Well, and Matthew O'Malley and Ben Rossett, I've had Between Two Cities sitting on my shelf for multiple years here in my next up shelf. And you know how I am with a sucker of wanting to try all of the games that designers have made. So listeners, be on the lookout for a possible follow-up in the next few weeks to few years for that one.
Few years. All right, well, that is our game of the week. First in Flight by Artana. Let's move on to the School of Gaming.
The School of Gaming. In the School of Gaming, we discuss concepts, keywords, etiquette, and helpful ideas in the world of gaming. This week, we're going to discuss what tools would be nice to have to help to teach games.
Yeah, physical tools for teaching games. This comes from Sean. He wanted to know what tools, physical, would be nice to have to help teach games. A pointy wargamer stick, extra dice, TV with Rodney playing in the background all the time. For those of you that don't know, Rodney Smith from Watch It Played does a lot of rules teaches. So
the best.
That would be the connection there. What do you think, Michael? What things stand out to you? I've got a couple, but they're interesting.
Yeah,
I'll save them.
Pretty straightforward here. I don't think there's any substitute for having the actual game. And I know that may sound silly, but I have been guilty of we're going to play a game in the future, so I'm just going to talk about the game. That doesn't always work so well, especially from 8 years old on up. They really need to see the game. So have the game, if possible, have multiple copies, but really just one copy of the game out, ready to go on a table set up for when you're getting ready to teach it. The two things are just really quick here, and then I'll send it over to you and we can do a little back and forth. But I think dice trays or a dice container, anything from a plastic Ziploc, or not Ziploc, but Tupperware bowl down to a nice wooden dice tray. A dice tray can go a long ways because dice will fly. And then it lets people know that, hey, this is where the game space is. You're almost setting that magical circle up by having some little containers there, both that objects from the game come out of and objects of the game get thrown into. And then the last thing is just something for kids or people to hold a card or cards. I can't tell you how valuable it is to have a little stand, a little tray, a little something, and there's a million different things out there, but that will actually hold the cards for the people, for the kiddos.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I had that one as well. The two main ones that I have are, and the idea of teaching a game and how, physical tools for teaching a game, and some of them require some effort up front. And the first one I have is trays and inserts. So if the game doesn't come with a great insert right out of the box, the idea of either getting something from Folded Space or having your own containers, that the faster you can get a game set up and ready to go, the easier it will be to teach it while it's all on the table. One of the biggest things that I see that does not work is people trying to teach the game while they're setting up, because you're trying to grab stuff out of the box, you're saying what this is, but you're not doing it in any sort of order that makes sense, and at the same time that person's looking through the rule book saying, how many cards does each person get?
Yeah, you get
3
things
5
at once.
You're trying to do all that stuff. So if you can get the game set up and you have tools in the way to help you get that set up faster, it will pay dividends in how you teach a game, I think is huge. The other one that I have is if the game does not provide it or does not provide enough of them, player aids that a lot of them on Board Game Geek that you could print off and add and throw into your box, whether it's, there's two that I can think of, is one is when there's a whole bunch of symbols in a game, and sometimes games with a bunch of symbols have one player aid that then everybody is passing around throughout the entire game. What is it? I just got this card. What does this mean? The other thing is a turn order structure, so that once you do your teach, everybody's got that turn order, and you can kind of follow that as a guide, is going to make that first play and teaching the game and even using that as an aid while you're
almost
teaching.
Talking like a flow chart.
Yeah,
for turn order structure.
That thing that's saying, okay, here's what we do at the beginning of every round. Then you do this. You can take these 5 actions. It does 2 things. One is it makes it easy for you to explain it while you're teaching. The other thing is it gives something for the people that you're teaching to look at and hold while you're teaching. Because a lot of the times you've just laid out this beautiful deluxe game, and everybody is looking at all of the different board spaces, all of the shiny coins, the little bits over here, and sometimes having that player aid, even if you printed it off separately, gives them something to look at and touch instead of their mind wandering to all of the different things, when a lot of times games that can seem complex or a board that's busy with artwork, once you break it down, sometimes it's only like there's 6 spaces on the board that you can go to. That's it. And I know there's a whole bunch of stuff going on and different artwork over here. It's like, let's break these down. And sometimes when you have people that are sitting at the table seeing a game for the first time and they're seeing all that artwork, it's overwhelmed and they start glazing over. So I think printing out those player aids, whether it's for symbols or turn order, can be really helpful. And there's a ton of them on Board Game Geek. Almost for every game that you can think of, somebody has gone and done something, even a condensed rule chart
those are
or something like that.
Really good suggestions. Really good suggestions. There are 2 things from Sean's question that I just want to jump in on and kind of give my own experience and take, and you might see it differently or have different experiences or take. But I know Sean teaches a lot of games. Sean is on our Discord and has a very active game group at work that play a lot of games over lunch. So I'm going to be curious to hear what Sean's perspective and take is. But me, I don't do a rules video at the table if I'm teaching.
No.
I just have not had that work out well. I will send a video to people ahead of time if I know that there's a specific game we're going to play so they can reference it. But typically, the Rodney Smith Watch It Played, that's for me to learn the game ahead of time. I have not had great luck with my family or with in the community setting with the rules video. Anything on that one?
No, well, I agree 100%. And I think one of the things I feel like Watch It Played is great for the teacher of the game, but a lot of times it's goes into too much detail on. So like at the beginning of the videos, there's always the setup. It's like a person learning the game doesn't need to know how the game is set up.
It should already be done for them. Yeah.
So it's like there's a whole section that's over there. And then because it's a thorough video, and he does an awesome job. I don't want
He's
it to
the best
come across.
in the business.
Almost every rule is gone over.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of rules that a first-time player, you don't need to address until they come up or when it happens or if it happens. So there's a lot of extra stuff. So the Rodney, the Watch It Played, I think is a great if you've got adults that you're meeting on Thursday, you're playing this kind of heavy game. Everybody do a little homework and learn about this game beforehand. But as far as, hey, sit down, we're going to learn this play from a video, the only ones that I can think of are usually party-style games or quicker games, and the publisher puts something out of like, you do this, 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 and this, and then you're good to go and everybody's up and running. But those are usually games that are under 20 minutes. Anything over a half hour, you're gonna have a hard time maintaining attention when you have a whole bunch of cool bits out on the table for somebody to watch a 15 to 20 minute video to learn a game. When that same information can probably be conveyed in less than 5 minutes.
Yep, I agree. And the other thing, extra dice is not something that I would typically take along. I feel like I could see the exceptions or the games where that really makes a lot of sense, and I think we'll talk about that in our next segment from time to time. But the pointer stick is an interesting one, and I know that you have those props that are unique to you as a teacher. Each person who is in the role of teaching, and when you're teaching a game, you're a teacher. I think that's just such a great little almost suggestion within the question of what are those physical props that help you as a teacher, right? Coaches use whistles and teachers have their own unique physical items that help to teach. I just know that my oldest kiddo and I were at Noble Night about a year ago for a D&D adventure, and it was my first time doing it, and I was a little nervous. And somebody about 25 years older than me and about 3.5 feet shorter than me went right into her pocket, and she got this thing out that had a skull with an index finger at the end, and I was like, what is going on? And it was a pointer, and she stretched it out, and she used it to just slide her dice across the table, and it was so memorable. It was one of those moments where, like, yeah, if you have something that can help to point, it's just in the games that we're talking about typically, they're played in under an hour, they're set up in under 20 minutes, and they're not going to take a ping pong, typically not going to take a ping pong table worth of space where you need that huge pointer. But I just thought that's a really interesting suggestion of if you have something that helps you teach, take it. But in the games that we're talking about, that's often not the case.
Well, and it probably is audience dependent as well. So it's like I could see you getting away with using a pointer stick in a classroom to kind of make a bigger point or gesture, or if you put something on a screen, and you're pointing out the board on your giant whiteboard or something like that. I feel like if I brought a pointy stick to teach Michael a game, he'd snap it over his knee halfway through the teach.
I'd be twirling that thing.
So, some of those things may be audience dependent as well of what you can and can't get away with. So love to hear what the folks on the Discord have, if they have anything that works for them or that they think is, indispensable that they have every time they teach. I'd love to hear where we're missing and what kind of gaps we might have for some physical tools for teaching games.
I just had one more. Don't forget the batteries. A lot of games do require batteries.
Sure.
Tackle
or extra markers.
Is one. What's that?
Extra markers.
Batteries and expo markers. Yeah. So those are two that I do keep in my backpack just for teaching board games.
All right. So there's some physical tools for teaching games. Let's move on to the high five. If you're anything like us, you're constantly on the hunt for new games to try out. This week, Michael and I are going into a Wayback Machine and revisiting the high five dice chucking games. Michael, I don't even know if you did a list the first time around.
You do know the answer. Nice professional setup. I did not do a list the first time around. And you know that answer because I just told you off air that I didn't do one, but I like how you did that. Very rarely do I see your theater background coming out, but that was nice, Doug. So
now I feel like I'm naked. Thank you for exposing that.
Sorry. I just like to be honest and transparent whenever possible. That was episode 20. That's a long time ago, Doug.
Yeah.
Century Spice Road was the game of the week there. No, I didn't. So I actually brought 6 to the table. I couldn't make a cut at
10.
5. I brought a full 6, but the 6th one I'll leave out because I don't want to steal your thunder in case we do have crossover. I'll just say that's my 6th one because you know how I love my dice chuckers.
So I've got some that have dropped off the list. Basically, some that were honorable mentions last time are now in my list.
They better
Some
be.
that were on my list last time are now in my honorable mentions. And one that I didn't have at all last time. And as far as me, the clarification for this is games that the predominant mechanism is throwing dice. There's a lot of games with dice rolling, but these are ones that if you take the dice out, the game falls apart, and I want to be holding a mitt full of dice, not just I'm going to roll a die and see what happens. I need to be holding at least 3 dice at a time.
And I agree with that. I do have one exception, and we'll get to that when we get to the exception where there aren't that many dice, but the dice are everything to the game. So this is good. Right. Should we just jump in?
Go for it.
Number 5 for me, listeners will know because we've been talking about it a lot lately. That's Dice Hunters of Therion. Sir Richard Garfield and Amigo, episode 141. It was our game of the week. Just an excellent game where you're chucking dice and using them to try to defeat some thieves, and just a ton of fun. A game that has brought a lot of joy to my house and also to our game group, and one that I think works in a lot of different settings. So I don't know if there's more that you want to say about it or if I should hold on that, but that's number 5 for me.
No, it was one of and while I was making this list, I'm like, I know I'm going to forget something. That there's going to be games that I just forget.
So many good dice chuckers, Doug.
That was I missed that one.
Yeah, and published by Amigo here in North America, and just a great game, under $20 all day long. And rarely do I send people to Amazon to buy games, but our friend over at Amigo, Corey, has just said that they have a store up over there. So go support Amigo or Sir Richard Garfield, or if you're looking for a nice accessible game. My friendly local game stores haven't had it either because I've actually given that one as a gift more than once. So that's number 5 for me is Dice Hunters of Therion.
Awesome. My number 5 is Dice Hunters of Thanos Rising. Is Thanos Rising the Avengers Infinity War? This game came out in 2018 from the Op Games and designer Andrew Wolf. It has been rethemed. There's a Harry Potter version, Death Eaters Rising. There's a SpongeBob version. There's a Batman version. And I believe there's a Star Wars version, all in various regions and locales. I don't know if you can get the Star Wars in the U.S. or not, but I digress. Thanos Rising is one where you start out, and it's a classic Yahtzee-style thing in which you have a handful of dice that your initial character gives you, but as you recruit more heroes to your cause, and say I add Captain America, he's going to give me some other dice. So now I'm rolling 6 dice instead of 5, and then I'm up to 7 and 8, and you're trying to recruit new heroes with those dice rolls and defeat the villains by attacking them with dice rolls, by assigning your dice each time you roll. And so it's a cool theme that I enjoy, and it does give me that feel of that mound of dice growing bigger and bigger to where there's something cool. It doesn't happen in a lot of games, but we're like, I get to throw 8 dice on this turn, which is really cool. And so that is Thanos Rising Avengers Affinity War. Not on my list last time.
No, good one. Number 4 for me is from John D. Clare. When you know him like we know him, you have to put the D in it. We're not on a first name basis yet with this master designer. And AEG is a publisher, and that's Space Base, a game that I very recently have gotten to play again, where you are chucking dice and then the dice are assigned or actually trigger off abilities of ships that you have. And so it just happens in a wonderful way throughout the game where all of the dice are thrown and there's a sense of, what's going to happen, and it's on every turn, right? And the person who's the lead player gets to activate both of the dice, and everybody else just gets to do a combination of one of them. Or it doesn't trigger as coolly, I should say. But just a game that I've really enjoyed playing recently with my nephew and my brother-in-law, and I realized, hey, man, this is why this thing's in my collection. I enjoy what happens when those dice are rolled. Without the dice, the game just doesn't just doesn't do it. And we have another game on there, but I'll hold in case it comes up later on in the conversation that has some similar mechanisms. But that's my number 4 is Space Base.
There are 3 games that I am aware of that have that type of mechanism, and none of them are on my list. And for whatever reason, I never...
You don't associate them with dice chucking, huh?
No, because I feel like there's not I feel like another element of dice chucking that I didn't mention at the beginning that I think I associate with it is that Yahoo moment of explosion of awesome.
And I have that when one of my cards gets activated, but I know what you're saying. You may, I do.
The only ones that would do that is like in Space Base is on like the 12, where it's like the super rare one where you're like, yes, that actually happened. But other than that,
might not happen in some games.
Yeah, and other than that, it almost feels like you're rolling dice, but it has the same feel of just like flipping over the next card and it's a number on there. So it has.
I guess your other two games
that do
that. I'm going to guess Bad Company, which was a game of the week, and Machikoro.
Correct. Yeah.
Look at that, Doug. We're friends.
So neither of those, none of those made my list for that reason, but completely viable. I'll allow it, as I would say.
Oh, thank you.
Number 4 for me is my Sir Richard Garfield game for the list, and that's 2011's King of Tokyo from Yellow. We talked about this way back in episode 10, so that's a long time ago. But King of Tokyo takes that classic Yahtzee mechanism. You're rolling the dice, either going for points or to attack the other monsters in the game, or accrue energy to get cool power-ups and awesome abilities. If you want to know more details, again, episode 10. But King of Tokyo is another one that, and that one is one where the dice are bigger. They're chunkier, fatter dice than you normally have. So that adds to that awesomeness of dice chucking on that one. My number 4, King of Tokyo.
My number 3 is the newest game on our list. It's from 2023, and that's Chicken with an exclamation point. Designer Scott Alms and publisher Keymaster Games. And Chicken, we've talked about it on and off here the last 6 months. I think we've both had quite a few plays of it. But it is a press your luck game where you are rolling a mittful of dice, and when eggs come up, it hatches more chickens. But if the foxes come up, you can bust. So it is just a very pure and simple push your luck game, and you are trying to get chickens, and then you hold and you advance your tracker around a track by the number of chickens that came up. So just a nice little, some would actually call it an activity. I stand by my statement that this is a fun game and one that we enjoy playing in our house, because I mean it's done in 10 minutes. Everybody can play. It's whimsical, 2 to 8 players, so it works for our whole family. And that's my number 3, Dice Chuckers Chicken. Obviously wasn't on our list last time because it wasn't yet published.
Yes. That was on my honorable mention, so did not make my full list. My number 3 is, I believe, the game that Michael was alluding to earlier, that you are only rolling 1 die on your turn. However, the results of that 1 die are crazy, which is what adds to the enjoyment for me and makes me feel like that euphoria of excitement that happens with rolling dice, and that's Impact Battle of Elements, 2018 by Ravensburger and Dieter Nuble. I'm not sure about that name.
Dieter Nussel.
Nussel, yeah.
That's a double S.
Okay, wow. Learn something new. I need to get better at, is that German?
Yeah.
Okay, need to get better at that. But Impact Battle of the Elements, you have a pool of dice. You're going to take one and throw it into this arena. It's going to bounce off any other dice, and if you make a match, you get to pull dice out. And if you don't, it stays in there. And you are trying to be the last one standing with dice, and it is a fun little game. I know some people prefer the game Strike, which it was based on, and I think the Harry Potter version that they came out with is also pretty cool as well. So whichever version you prefer, Impact Battle of Elements has been the game in my household. So that is why it is my number 3.
And Doug, what happens if you are so excited and the die bounces out of the arena?
It's gone.
It's gone. I love that. Yeah, I absolutely do love that. Oh, that's good. Yep. Good one. We've talked about that one, and we continue to talk about that one because we continue to have fun playing that in both of our houses. That's cool. Yeah, my number 2 is the game that doesn't involve a ton of dice. It only involves 4, and it is a classic from 1980. So it's my oldest game on the list, and that is Can't Stop. Sid Sackson's Can't Stop. And in Can't Stop, think of like I was going to say a Chinese checkers looking board, but it's a board in which you have 2 through 12 on these tracks, and you are rolling 4 dice, and you're making combinations and trying to move along these tracks. And if you get to the top of 3 tracks, you win. And there's just a wonderful tension as the dice are being rolled, and because once somebody gets to the top of a track, that track's gone, and there's no more movement on it. So the 2s only have 3 spots, and then the 6, 7, and 8s have a whole bunch of spots, and you don't know when should you stop. Should you stop in the middle? Should you stop 2/3 up? But if you roll those 4 die, and if you can't move one of your 3 because you only get to place out 3 of your little trackers, you bust and your turn's over. And so it just really has that casino vibe, that sense of I'm gambling here. And I didn't even invest any money. So that's my number. What are we on here? 2 is Can't Stop, a game that I really enjoy playing.
Interesting. I'm assuming my number 1 is going to be your number 1, but I could be wrong. So I'm surprised that my
was
number 2...
Was it on your honorable mention last time?
My number 1?
Yeah.
It was on my honorable mention.
In segment 20, when I gave you a really hard time about it, did you make fun of me?
Don't recall.
Oh, okay. I think we have some crossover here. Go ahead, Doug. What's?
But I'm surprised that my number 2 is not on your list. And that one we talked about in episode 113, and that is Las Vegas from Rudiger Dorn, Ravensburger in 2012.
I told you I brought 6 to the party, baby. Go ahead. Tell folks about...
There's your 6. That's your hanger-on. Las Vegas, just a fantastic little dice game where you're rolling your dice, and then you have to assign all of a single die type to a single casino. So all of your 3s need to go. You can't split up your dice. You have to pick a number, move all of the dice with that face on it to that casino. And some wild and crazy things happen towards the end of each round when you want a die to come up in a certain way and it does not, and it can completely destroy you, or you can be cheering at the table. It has all of the high stakes excitement of Las Vegas and roulette wrapped up in a fun family game, and that is Las Vegas, my number 2.
I love that game. Recently, we played a 3-player game of that. My youngest kiddo and my wife tied like 340,000 each or something like that. And then the tiebreaker was whoever had the most notes. And then my 8-year-old had 1 extra casino note, so they were the winner. It's just like, it's such a good game. Good one, Doug. Yeah, our number 1, I think I could say confidently, but my number 1 dice chucker is Dice Throne from Roxley, and I just put all things Dice Throne. I had a hard time choosing, and I was going to take a picture of the calyx that is all things Dice Throne. I have a whole bottom row of Dice Throne. I can't wait for Marvel Dice Throne to come. I can't get enough Dice Throne in my life. Dice Throne, Dice Throne, Dice Throne. But in Dice Throne, you have a character, you have a very small deck of cards, and then you're chucking off dice to try to form combinations. And the game that we have talked about in the past is also a cooperative version known as Dice Throne Adventures. So you're not battling head to head against each other. You're actually going through a dungeon, or you're battling a boss in Dice Throne Adventures. One note, it is a more expensive game, and it doesn't come with any of the figures, so you have to have at least 2 figures to play it. But if you have 2 figures and want to go through just hours of fun, that's definitely a try if you get the chance from the Game Schooler podcast. So I think I've said enough about Gavin Brown and team Manny Tremblay and our friends over at Roxley. I'll send it over to you, Doug.
Yeah, so that's mine as well. I think it falls into the mechanism, right? Which is a Yahtzee mechanism in a fantasy Marvel universe. You're rolling your dice, you get 3 chances to roll the combination that you want, and it just works. So I didn't put a specific one on there as well. I think no matter which version you're playing, they're all essentially the same, doing the same thing. What I give you a hard time for in episode 24.
Well, I think that just talks about how we've changed, and it's good. You know, people change, and the world is always changing and evolving as well. We're on episode 162 here, so if we flash back to 142 episodes ago, it was an honorable mention for you because you could not recommend a game that was almost $100 to our listeners. I mean, at that point in time, a big part of what we were doing in our brand was you had to be able to go out and get it, and it had to be accessible, and it had to be affordable. It had to be under $50. And we also had like a very hard rule of consensus. Everything that we talked about, the game had to be a 10 out of 10. And I think as we have changed as gamers, and as our show has continued to grow and shift, you know, it's a try if you get the chance. Don't run out and buy everything that we talk about. That would not be wise or prudent or good for anybody. But if you get the chance to come across this game, check it out. So that's all. It's more of a reflection of how our show has changed over time. At the time too, I think we were playing a lot of Dice Throne. I believe at that point
we were
been going back through Dice Throne Adventures for the second time.
Yeah. No, I think that is great. The idea of realizing people have the chance to try stuff. You don't always need to rush out and get it, and trusting. And that was another thing where it was like, there's no way you could fit that into a school, right? At the time in those early episodes as well. So as far as honorable mentions, Michael mentioned Chicken, Cuphead, which is a real-time
that's a fun
cooperative game. Dice Forge is a good dice rolling game, which you are building your dice up. So it's a kind of a dice rolling with a deck building, but you're adding new sides to your face, or new faces to your dice.
I knew what you were saying.
Dungeon Fighter, which is a dexterity dice rolling game, which is pretty cool as you try and land dice on a specific area of the board to do damage. And then Pandemic the Cure is a cooperative push your luck dice rolling game as well. So any other ones you want to mention, Michael?
Nope, you got them all. We covered them. I knew that we would.
All right, awesome. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. We really appreciate that, and helps us out a lot to keep track of, you know, what we're doing for you guys and that you're enjoying it. Follow us on @GameSchoolerU. We'll try and do better posting there. We are horrible.
We're in the Discord. If you want to find us, come in the Discord.
Horrible social media people, but I know we need to get better at that. And it makes it easier for you guys to share what we're doing as well. Join the Discord, gameschooler.com/Discord, and join us there. Michael said you can talk to us there if you need a question, and a lot of other helpful folks there as well. Next week, I have no idea what we're doing. Michael and I have to regroup and discuss, and we'll find something awesome to talk about. So thank you for spending the last hour or so with us. We truly appreciate it.
Now get out there and keep gaming.